Y ahora le cedo la palabra.
Well, let me now give the floor to Miss Laura Thompson, Deputy Director General of the International Organization for Migration, IOM. And she'll be able to tell us how things are across the world. Thank you.
Gracias, señor presidente. It is always extremely good to speak the last in a panel because normally everybody else have said everything that you had in your notes. So let me ignore my notes and let's talk about what migration is. Because very often we are presented with migration as a fatality, as something, and particularly now if you turn on your televisions or the newspapers in Europe, the only words that come across when you're looking at the situation in the Mediterranean is challenges, is problem, is illegality, and this type of titles, and how these flows that are happening to in the Mediterranean and arriving in Europe are unprecedented in history, and how this is going to completely reshape, basically, Europe's composition of the society, and how after this life in Europe is going to be completely different. So what I will try to do, since both of you took all my notes, is basically to try to put that into a broader context of where we are, what is the rest of the world, and how the rest of the world has been seeing migration and dealing with migration that very often has been even bigger than what is coming to Europe, and certainly much bigger than what is coming to Europe now today in the perspective of forced migration. And let me start by that, by dividing the two, because there is we talked today about 250 million migrants, international migrants around the world, and we talk about 740 internal migrants within their own country that move around. Only in China there are more migrants that move within China than the migrants that exist in the international world. So the reality is that migration is a phenomenon that has been historically approximately 3% of the population of the world has migrated. And that is from the historic times of the past when my country, Costa Rica, didn't exist, until now. There is still 3% of the population that is migrating. What has changed substantially is what that 3% means in real numbers. And obviously because the number of people that exist around the world is today, I don't know how many times bigger, then the real number of people moving is much more larger. The second element that has changed is that in the past, and still in the generation of our grandfathers or our fathers and mothers, the people used to go from one direction to another. Migratory flows were one-sided normally, and one movement. Today, people move around the world in different directions, in different times. The same person does several movements throughout their life. And migration is not anymore a life decision. It is sometimes for 1 year, it is sometimes for 10 years, but the people keep an eye on where the world is. And this has been generated because of a series of reasons. Obviously, the globalization, the better connections, the better information about the world, the internet, social media, etc., has made a lot of it. But there are other reasons why people migrate. Climate change, environmental degradation is one, more and more recognized. Urbanization of around the world. We are for the first time in a world that the majority of the people, more than 50%, live in cities and not in rural areas. So people are living from the rural areas, getting to the cities, less opportunities in the cities, so they have to go somewhere else. So again, that produces another type of movement. But also because, again, the conflicts and the natural disasters are affecting more people, because more people live in the countries. Now today, when you have a flood in Pakistan, you have 10 million of people that are affected by the flood. So there are 10 million people that are displaced, but because of this event. Eventually, 50 years ago, that was 300,000 people, whereas today it's 10 million. And as a result of that, that generates, again, large movements. And we are seeing it today, obviously, with Syria. And this is one of the consequences. I think our colleague from UNHCR described very well how the situation in Syria today has impacted really where refugees are going, and has created the whole situation that Mr. Kohler described in the European Union, the arrival, and that was a long part of my notes. Thank you very much for avoiding me with that.
I can return it to you.
So one question is, and I think one of the, I would like to divide this into two, because why people from Syria are coming to Europe today? Well, I think our UNHCR colleague explained that very well, and Michael as well. I mean, we have people that are really tired of being in camps. The situation in the camps is, even if UNHCR and us, we try to do the nicest camps in the world, they are always not really nice places to be. And certainly lack of opportunity, lack of education, lack of what we all call a normal life makes people move around. Was this unpredictable? Honestly, not. I participated in a meeting of the ministers of Justice and Home Affairs 5 years ago in Cyprus, 2012, 3 years ago, sorry. And by then, we were already talking about if the war in Syria becomes protracted, then people will start moving out of the 3 countries that people are staying, because they will be looking for more sustainable solutions. But because my 2 colleagues talk a lot about this specific forced migration that is coming to Europe, I will not talk about that. So let's talk about the other part, because what we have all agreed is that these are mixed migration flows. These flows are composed of refugees, asylum seekers, but also are composed of a lot of people that are looking for solutions, because either they don't have job opportunities in their countries, there is instability at the governmental level, there is lack of development, or because they are misled by gangs of traffickers, and they are offered jobs in Europe or somewhere else, so they are taken despite themselves, we can say. And a lot of these people are coming to Europe. Are they only coming to Europe? No, certainly not. Actually, today, of these 250 million international migrants, we said that around 35 to 40% of them are going from the south to the north. So that is obviously Europe, but the main corridor is Latin America, basically Mexico, United States. That is the largest migratory corridor in the world. The second largest until now was Asia, Central Asia, Russia. And Europe was, if not even, the third. Today, things are a little bit moving, and Europe is becoming more, Germany particularly, is becoming one of the important corridors. But just before 2 years ago, it was not even in the top 5 of the corridors. It was actually Africa, South Africa, was a much higher corridor than Europe a couple of years ago. So migrants are going in all directions. As I said, 35 to 40% south-north, but another 35-40% is south-south. So within Africa, the majority of the Africans move within Africa. They don't come to Europe. And they are not, as we hear very often, sitting all waiting for a boat to cross the Mediterranean. Certainly not. The majority of them actually are going the opposite direction. They are going south. They are going to South Africa. They are going to Angola. They are going to other locations where there is economic development. Because what we keep forgetting is, and I appreciate very much the conclusions of the Valletta Summit and the incorporation of the whole logic of the root causes into the approach to respond to the Mediterranean causes. But what we keep forgetting is that migration is a push factor situation. People move out of a place because of root causes, because there are lack of development, lack of jobs, etc., etc., etc. But there is something else in the equation that is extremely important and that nobody mentions when we talk about this, and it's the pull factor. Why people come to Europe, or why people go to South Africa, or why people go to the United States, why people come to my country, to Costa Rica, despite that we are small and not rich? Well, because there are pulling factors. There are jobs. There is economic growth. There is quality of life. There is good education and health systems. There are a series of pulling factors that make people come into one specific direction. And in Europe, those pulling factors are extremely present. And we want, in a certain way, up to now, there has been a policy that has been extremely restrictive with regard to the creation of legal channels of migration from one side. And on the other hand, you have a large amount of need of migrants. You have sectorial gaps in the labor market at all levels of qualification. It's not only at the lower levels of qualification or at the, as some people believe, only in the high levels of qualification. There is everywhere. There is from construction to agriculture, elderly care, there is nurses, there are doctors, engineers, IT. So there is everywhere gaps, sectorial gaps in Europe that are attracting people because they know that the jobs are there. They know that either those that are qualified or they know that the European population, despite the fact that they are extremely highly qualified, they don't have necessarily the skills that are needed by the companies, by the private sector, by the energetic growing economy and innovation systems of Europe. They don't necessarily get the type of skills that they are looking for. So they are looking in the global labor market that exists today, that is a reality, and that they know that they can find the skills from one side. And from the other side, you have this large amount of people that see job possibilities in Europe in the less qualified areas that is not necessarily something that everybody can do, because, I could be relatively good for doing the job that I do, but I'm certainly not good for picking coffee or other things. Despite the fact that it's lower qualified than what I have, I really will be very bad in picking coffee, and I have tried that in my country, and I can assure you that it's a very difficult task to do. So the reality is that not because we are qualified, we can do whatever job. So there are a lot of jobs that a lot of very qualified Europeans, not only they don't want to do, but they cannot do. And that will affect the economy and the economic growth and the development of Europe if we don't find somebody else to do it. That is one side. But there is another side. And the other side is called aging population in Europe and dependency rates. We are growing in age in Europe, having much less children, and as a result of that, Europe, only for keeping the current labor rate or the current labor population that is today, needs somewhere around 50 million people by 2030, 2050. And if we want to keep the dependency rates that we have today in Europe, the dependency rates, that means the people that are working versus the people that are not working and that are sustained by the system, you will need somewhere around 183 million migrants just to come and start working in Europe. So how is Europe going to do without those people? And then the question comes, are we really into a situation that everybody has to be afraid? Because what we are receiving now, and I know that the numbers are large, and I know perfectly well, because my organization deals with that very much, that dealing with a net increase of arrivals is a very difficult task, that there have to be mechanisms that are created, that systems need to be put in place, that distinction and separation of people by legal categories have to happen, that reception centers have to be created. All this, indeed, is a challenge. And there is no doubt, and I think organizations like UNHCR, like us, like other organizations also that are working, the Red Cross and others that we are working all together, a lot of civil society, we are trying to help and assist governments to do it in the best way and in the quickest way. Is a moving target, because sometimes we prepare for 1,000 and then the next day there are 5,000. And then we prepare here and then the people move somewhere else. Because migration is like water. It goes where there is a space. And closing borders doesn't help anybody. We have seen it. What we have done has been diverting the flows into different directions, which make it even more difficult to address, because it becomes indeed a moving target, a target that we are chasing everywhere in Europe without really finding the solution. And I think there is a lot of room here for moving the discourse that we are having, the discourse that we see at the media today, the discourse that we are having in all these forums. Because I have never been in any of these forums that have talked about, let's talk about these realities. And if we talked about the realities, maybe instead of seeing and worrying really much about how much this is going to impact our culture, our societies, how Europe is going to be different, maybe we think about the opportunity that this brings. Maybe we think about how can we not only help these people that are in need, several of them, but also use them to help us. Because at the end of the day, development, economic development, is not only good for the ones that are outside and that lack of development. Europe depends on that. The whole construction of the European Union, the whole European identity also comes with a certain level of development, with a certain level of also of compassion with others, with a certain level of respect of human rights, with a very high standards about human values. And really, it will be a pity not to use this opportunity to also show how Europe can not only have those human values that are extremely important, and that respect for rights and for human rights particularly within the concept of the creation of Europe, but also that is applied to whoever enters or is outside the Union. So I hope that I have not disappointed you very much, because this is the world, and I hope that to have helped you to put this into perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura.